I am delighted, elated, thrilled, joyful, and all of those adjectives and more to have one of my first Substack podcast, video, whatever we're going to call it, on a subject that is very dear to my heart and soul. And in particular, for me, finding out that the esteemed guest is someone who is not only aware of the music of and the impact of Nina Simone in the world is particularly important to me. And so I know there are many people I could have had who have expertise about Nina's career and can talk from different perspectives. But for me, it's very much about how her music has impacted so many people and cross-generationally, internationally, in so many ways that I could never have imagined when I first encountered Nina Simone directly in 1965. So that said, let me introduce my esteemed guest, okay? Because that is the right way to refer to Thea Wood, who is a fellow Substacker, so to speak. And let me just say a few things about Thea. She has over 30 years of experience in the corporate world and startups with an emphasis on female empowerment. Now, I'm going to stop for a moment and tell you that if I said nothing else other than that, I know Nina in spirit would be cheering at the idea of me speaking with someone who has an emphasis on female empowerment. And let me continue. And music media. She recently decided at some point, she decided it was time to shift back and give. And in 2018, by supporting gender equity for women in music after seeing the Joan Jett documentary Bad Reputation. Horizon Music, the newsletter and podcast became a reality within 6 months, and both spotlight women who work on stage, on air, and behind the scenes in music and the issues that affect them. So without, as they used to say, further ado, hello, Thea Wood of Horizon Music. Am I saying it correctly?
You are. Thank you so much for the lovely introduction, David. And by the way, happy belated birthday.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's a little, yeah, that's true. I mean, what day is it today? It's 10 days ago. But you know what? I could keep celebrating for the entire month and more. And so thank you for your kind birthday acknowledgement.
Absolutely. And happy Black History Month on top of it, which is a great time for Nina.
Yes, which is really, really appropriate. I mean, we can begin we can begin by talking about, and I think you did ask me this in one of our exchanges on Substack, about when you found out that I actually had met her. And obviously, I met her because of starting this Nina Simone Appreciation Society in England in 1965 when she was completely unknown. Completely.
You were the original club president.
I was, and I can give you a little bit of the backstory, but rather than me just giving it to you, why don't you ask me about it?
I am asking about it. First of
all, you are? Okay.
Yes, because it is intriguing how, you're a white man from England, and you end up being the first club president for a Black woman from the South in the United States who was called the voice of the civil rights movement. What grabbed you? What took your heart?
Well, I have to give you a little context. So, in 1964 was when I first got kind of, you could say, ushered into the world of R&B back then, because we didn't really use the term soul music at that point. I mean, I think people might have said some music was soulful, but soul music as a genre wasn't really existent in the same way it became. So I'm ushered into that by virtue of my love of music, pop music in particular in Britain. So I was a Beatles fan. I actually can tell you as an aside that the very first concert I ever went to was of the Beatles and Mary Wells in October of 1964 because my father managed a fish and chip shop, which we lived above in Kilburn in northwest London. And he right next to it was this massive cinema. It's still there, actually. The building, it's like one of those Art Deco buildings that's been preserved, called the State Cinema. And from time to time, they would have shows as well as films, and mostly they had films. Anyway, so the Beatles were performing there, and my dad knew the manager of the cinema, so he managed to get a ticket for me and my sister. 1964 October. My sister was way underage. And so that was my first concert. And can you imagine being, and I say ushered because that's the right word for me, ushered into the world of music that way with the Beatles and Mary Wells, right?
What a great intro.
Yes. And so that was kind of music I was listening to. And it really is I don't want to go into too much of the minutiae of the story of how come that you could say R&B in a way came into my life, because I want to make sure we spend as much time as we can speaking about Nina. So that gives you some context for it. And essentially the recording that really I could say got me was not by Nina, it was by Dionne Warwick. And it was Walk On By. And the story behind that is a whole nother story about which I can do another podcast, or maybe do another interview with you. Who knows? We shall see. But about Dionne, but the thing to know is that that was like my entree in a sense into the world of I'm going to call it a particular term to make it easier: Black music, right? Yep. And Dionne did an interview, and I was obsessed with Dionne. I mean, it's like that photographs are on the wall. I'm a teenager, Teenagers do funny things, don't they?
Yeah. Posters, yes.
Yes.
Album covers.
Yes.
Pouring through the album covers.
Yes. Dionne was she was, pictures on the wall and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so she had a fan club in England, and it was a fan club that also incorporated a group that was on the same record label as the Shirelles, a female group that were very popular in America and to some degree in England. And they, so there was a Dionne Warwick and Shirelles fan club. And then I got to find out about all these other fan clubs. So I joined the Dionne fan club, of course. I pestered the poor group, fan club secretary. When is Dionne coming to England? Can I meet her? I'm a kid, teenager. So Anyway, so now I knew there were fan clubs of people. And Dionne mentioned in an interview with one of the music press, because she was becoming very popular in England, who one of her favorite artists was of the day. And she mentioned Nina Simone. I had no idea who Nina Simone was, and most people in England had never. Really, she had almost no records out in England, even though she'd had albums out in America. And so I wonder who this Nina Simone is. All right, so now I was working at a record shop on Saturday mornings selling pocket money, and I asked the manager if he had any records by Nina Simone, and he said very kind of offhand, he said, well, she's a jazz artist, we have an album by her. And I said, okay. And so this is an album, it's an LP. And back then you could listen to music before you bought it.
Yes.
So I took my little LP in the booth and I put the needle on the arm of the first track, which was an album called Nina Simone at Town Hall. And the song was Black is the Color of My True Love's Hair. And I can still recall, Thea, how the moment I heard her voice, it's kind of hard to describe, but it hit me in my solar plexus. I mean, I didn't know what solar plexus was back then, but it was a voice. It's kind of strange to say this, but I kind of knew the voice, but not I knew it from another way of knowing it. And I started to cry.
Mm.
I mean, not sob, but I cried. It really, and even as I'm talking to you about now, I'm starting to get a lot of that emotion. You know, I was 16, yeah. I was 16, and, you know, it wasn't even that I necessarily understood what the subject was about.
Mm.
Black is the color of my true love's hair. It was a Norwegian folk song, actually. But it was how she delivered it. So I was like, oh, I've got to take this LP home with me. Fortunately, I got a discount because I worked there. But anyway, by the by. And then the next time I became aware of Nina's voice was actually a little later that same year when she had recorded a song called Don't Let Me Be Misunderstood, which of course is now part of not only her repertoire, but it's kind of like become a classic in the world of music. So, and I remember hearing it on the radio actually, and oh my God, I mean, this voice. And unfortunately for Nina, that was at a time when a lot of British groups would cover American Black artists and make their own versions of songs, and I say unfortunately because the original artists never necessarily got the same in interest or promotion for different reasons. And the group called The Animals, featuring Eric Burden, they did their version of Don't Let Me Be Misunderstood, which is a little different from Nina's.
Oh, yeah.
Because then I got in the mode of like, well, I've got to write to all the little music papers that the original, blah, 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 you know, you should listen to the original by Nina Simone. At this point, you know, I wasn't necessarily thinking I would start a fan club for her, but I thought all these other people have fan clubs. You know, there's Dion and the Shirelles, and there's all these other people who have fan clubs of American artists. So I want to be in with the in crowd, as one does as a teenager.
Of course.
And so I'm going to start a fan club for Nina Simone. And I wrote a letter to Philips Records in London asking if I could do that. And they sent the letter to her manager husband at the time, Andy Stroud. And they sent, and I got a direct letter from his office saying, yes, we would be delighted if you'd like to start I think I called it an appreciation society at that point, because Nina didn't feel like a fan club kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact,
I see that. I can see that.
Yeah. Now, that was my perspective on it. She still called it a fan club. I don't think I heard her say it was an appreciation society, but it felt kind of right, you know. And there were other appreciation societies in London, in England at the time. There was the Tamla Motown Appreciation Society, the one I most remember. I think the Dion one became that too. Dion Ashura's Appreciation Society. Very, very British, you know, very British.
So how did that lead to actually meeting her in person?
Yes. Once I got the okay to do the Appreciation Society, in the letter that they sent, that Andy Stroud's secretary sent me, they said Miss Simone will be making her first European visit in June. Now, this was in April of 1965, so 65, and she was going to be here in June. I mean, you know, what are the chances? This is the first time she's coming here. She's really unknown in Europe. And so they had planned this already. Partly, let me just give you a quick aside on that, because Nina was signed to Philips Records, which was really a Dutch company, and it was marketed in America through a company called, by a label called Mercury. Mm-hmm. But Nina's signing to Philips came as a direct result of the head of Philips in the Netherlands. So he was very aware of Nina's music. So it was that European connection already in existence. And she had not performed for any European audiences. So when I found that out, and I was in touch with Mr. Stroud more regularly in the next couple of months, and that was always by letter. I couldn't call, we didn't have access to calling him.
Right.
And, and then I stayed in touch with Philips Records in London. And on June, I think it's June the 26th, I think it was a Saturday morning. I was still in school. Saturday morning, I went to the airport and I had some flowers. And I don't even know how I got to the airport, but I did. I got to the airport, and of course, I knew what flight she was arriving on, got all that information, and she walked through the arrivals hall, which was very different from how it is now, with her husband and her 4-year-old daughter Lisa. And I was, I never met. Not only had never met anyone of that stature, of someone who was, a recording artist of note. This is also my, I don't want to say heroine, but kind of, she's like, this is who I've started this appreciation society for. And I know I turned every color of crimson because I'm a kid. I'm like, you try to imagine, there's no one else there with me. And, I walked up to her and Andy and said, hello, I'm David. I'm the person who's started your appreciation society in England. And so she smiled. I gave her flowers. And, Andy said to me, you're grateful you came out to the airport to meet us. And I don't think there was anyone there from the record company, but there was a limousine waiting for them.
Okay.
And someone was there to take their bags and stuff like that. Anyway, so that was my first face-to-face. But I want to let you know, because it's important in the story, because there was just moments when there was just Nina and I, and Lisa was with her, of course, waiting for the bags to come through. And so Nina, says, and I'm trying, it's a bit naughty, but I'll give you how she sounded at the time. David, whose music do you listen to other than mine? And I said, I was quite timid. I'm not like, anyway, let's just say that it was like, okay, I said, well, the other, I remember I stuttered even then probably. I said, and another American singer called Dionne Warwick, because that's what we call her in England. And Nina said, well, who's she? I'd never heard of her. She really? And it was true. She hadn't. I mean, Nina was not in, you've got some 1965.
Yeah.
Not in the world of necessarily so much pop music. And, she's very much in the world in her own world, and in the world of civil. I mean, I'm saying she was in civil rights. She was doing a lot in civil rights. That wasn't her world to know who Dionne was. And she turned to her husband, manager Andy, and said, do you know who he's talking about? And Andy said famously, she's the girl who sings with Burt Bacharach, because Dionne wasn't that old anyway. So that girl, right, I suppose, was the right thing to say. And so Nina said, well, I'll check her out when I go back to America. And then Nina began telling me about somebody else. And this is only relevant to the story because of how it ended up impacting the whole rest of my life. So she says, and David, you have someone here in England who is doing the music of one of our American singers. And when Nina did, of course, what happened with her, Don't Let Me Be Misunderstood, she was not a very great fan of people taking people's music and reinterpreting it.
Oh, interesting. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And then so she said, you have this singer in England, a white singer in England, I think Dusty Springfield, and she sounds just like one of our artists, young artists, Aretha Franklin, and which was not exactly true, but I knew she was referring to the fact that Dusty Springfield had done one song by Aretha. Anyway, right. So Nina says to me, have you heard of Aretha Franklin? And I slightly lied because I hadn't. I think I'd heard the name, but I didn't know what she sounded like. I said, oh yeah, yeah. She said, you must check her out. So that was my first in-person conversation with Nina. And Andy said, would you like a ride back into the city with us in the limousine? Now, I mean, I'm in a limousine with Nina and Andy and Lisa. And Nina says, she asked me about the chimneys. We were on the motorway going into London. And she was looking at, she says, oh, all these houses have chimneys. She says, all the houses in England have chimneys. I said, well, no. But she was just being just conversational. So that was my first time actually meeting her. And then, whatever follows was I went to see her with my dad at the place she was performing, which only held about 50 people, jazz club. And I went to see her at a television show she was on called Ready, Steady, Go. And it was at that point that I had my first in-person direct conversation with her in the dressing room, where it was just the two of us. And
was that recorded, or was that just
you mean well, what was recorded was her performance on the show, but not she and I in the dressing room. No, it was
okay.
But yeah, so I was like, okay. So that was the start. And she was and remained, in a sense, larger than life in her persona. She was very expressive. She was a very, very expressive human being. And of course, the postscript to that is that when we went out onto into the studio, which is kind of like it was like one of those things in America, they called it shindig or whatever it was, is where teenagers danced to different songs at the time that were out. And so there were other people in the studio dancing, teenagers like me. And so Nina says to me, David, because she spoke like that, very kind of like a very kind of, not haughty, but kind of, David, yeah. She said, do you dance or dance? I said, no. She said, well, you have to learn, you have to learn to dance. She said, no, you've got to have rhythm. And either you learn to dance or you have to learn to have sex. Now, when you're talking to a 17-year-old, and I just said, okay. What can I say to her? But she said it with a big grin.
Oh, you know, she was messing with you. She wanted to have some fun.
Yes. Now, 2 years later, when I saw her, I was a lot more adult, and I had lunch with her. I never forget it. And I said, "Oh, Nina, remember what you told me?" She said, "No." I said, "You told me I had to learn to dance or have sex." She said, "Mm-hmm." I said, "Well, I now know how to do both."
Oh, what'd she say?
She laughed. She roared. Good. And then she started getting nosy, and I didn't want to talk about who I was having sex with, so I did tell her.
Oh, well, there you go.
No, at that point, anyway.
But that's how she was. She was very bold. She was very forward. What I love about your story is that Nina was not somebody who smiled because it was expected. She only smiled when she felt it. And I think that's very important to people to understand.
Yeah. And it made her, for a lot of people in the music industry, not just audiences, not just in music industry, audiences, she could be very fierce. And I mean fierce in terms of her persona, and that has something also had to do with a lot of different things, but also to do with the fact that she trained to be as a classical pianist. That was what she really wanted to do.
Yep.
And she knew that you can go out there, you're gritting and laughing at the audience. You went out there with a particular way of walking, a particular way of being, and her training in classical music really was what I think had her be that way in how she presents herself. And she was I think of Nina. I can't talk about it in past tense, but really she is for me. I still talk about her as is, even though she's not here in physical form. She's very much a very she wasn't, let me say this, she wasn't a tall person. She was shorter than me, and I ain't that tall. But it wasn't about her physical stature. It was about that the way I'm sitting up right now, it's that what she brought to everything. And I know that there were people who were terrified of her because of how she came across. Very, and yeah, I mean, very.
A large presence. She was a
There you go,
force. She was a force.
Absolutely. So I've said all that now, and now can I ask you before we? I know you probably have some other. I know you have other questions, but I want to know from you.
Yes.
At this juncture, how did Nina Simone and her music enter your life?